Continuing with the chapter on global inequality, we take a look at some of the potential downsides of globalization. So modernization theory says these increasing global connections in technology, politics, culture, and especially economy are functional for global society because global capitalism leads poor countries through the necessary stages of modernization, improving their technology and making them more productive, peaceful, and democratic. Multinational corporations and wealthy governments help by investing for their own economic interests. But are all countries successfully moving through these stages? Does everyone in these countries benefit? What are the side effects of globalized industrial capitalism for those who are left behind and for the future generations? Conflict theory's take on global capitalism is not so positive. It points out that, like families within a class society, we start out in the market with an invisible knapsack of unequal advantages. Most wealthy countries started out on top, with their recent dominance as colonial empires. Like the bourgeoisie, they own the means of production, such as wealth, technology, and government influence, and can therefore exploit poor countries, who, like the proletariat, are kept always weak enough that they remain dependent on foreign jobs and resources. Hence the name dependency theory. Thus, the false consciousness that keeps most people conforming to the system is the distraction of media and consumerism, and a dominant ideology that says social mobility is open, and poor countries just need to modernize. Empires such as the Persians, Romans, Muslims, Mongols, and Aztecs have battled for control of territory for thousands of years. But new technologies gave the most recent European empires a far broader reach, allowing them to gradually colonize most of the world. Colonialism was a coercive, often violent domination of one people by an outside state to exploit their land, resources, and, in many cases, the people themselves. To understand the effect that colonial empires had, let's first look at the world population, to our best knowledge, at the start of the European colonial period. Comparing that to the rough distribution of wealth at the time, as you can see, some regions had only a slight advantage economically, but after centuries of foreign control, European countries, like England, and our own country, which grew from its colonial immigrants, have taken on a huge share of the world's wealth. While capitalist production within those regions probably helped, the socialist Soviet Union's empire in Eastern Europe has grown slightly as well. But skip forward another half-century, we see that China and some other East Asian countries have grown, while other regions have actually shrunk. So some seem to have modernized successfully, while others have not. Keep in mind that China's current level of wealth, and that of other countries, must be considered relative to their populations. So dependency theory says that societies who entered the modern world under colonial rule were underdeveloped, kept poor and pre-industrial to remain dependent on imperial help. And when they won independence, they were often divided by scapegoat prejudice and lacking stable governments. This left them open to exploitation by multinational corporations, who rule not with guns, for the most part, but by dominating resources and markets in what could be called neo-colonialism. Dependency theory is tied to world system theory, which looks at the overall system of global capitalism and explains how wealthy regions form an economic core in blue that control the larger economy. They have the financial resources to buy up cheap natural resources, mostly in the poorest periphery regions, in yellow here. They then can produce market goods with more skilled factory work in developing semi-periphery regions, in green. Thus, they keep production costs low and can dominate the consumer market in both wealthy and developing regions, while continually adding to their own wealth. You can see that system in the exports of different countries, with the poorest regions primarily exporting cheap raw materials, while the wealthiest regions export the most advanced and therefore expensive consumer and production technology. Dividing the countries of the world by their average incomes, we see a similar breakdown of the map, with high-income countries containing about 23% of the population, while taking in 64% of the global income. Low-income countries with about 17% of the population, taking in only 3% of the income. And most people in middle-income countries with about 33% of global income, earning roughly between $2,500 and $13,000 per year, which would be considered deep poverty in the United States. We talked about the role of governments in state capitalism, but what about the greater freedom and democracy that are supposed to come with economic modernization? In many places, we have seen individual empowerment increase along with economic changes, but we've also seen that even in the United States, increased inequality seems tied to a power elite plutocracy. And in some parts of the world, such as China, economic growth has persisted alongside authoritarian governments. In other countries, we've seen increased wealth that has only strengthened dictatorships who try to maintain power over natural resources, often with the help of wealthy countries that use those resources.